America figured out fairly quickly after the war that a destroyed Europe was going to be a problem for America. And there's three main reasons for this. One is humanitarian. We see the Europeans as our allies. We see them as our friends. Culturally, we're obviously very connected. The second is economic. We rely on Europe to buy a lot of our stuff. And if the European economy is in shambles because of the war, they can't buy our things. But the third motive is political. There was a great fear that a troubled, a stressed Europe would turn to communism. Today, we may think of that as unlikely, but you have to remember, back in the late 1940s, communism had spread dramatically, and there was still this fear that countries who found themselves particularly in economic trouble might turn to communism as an answer. And so, in June 1947, General George Marshall, who's now the Secretary of State, announces a plan that he has spearheaded called the Marshall Plan. And it consists of America offering financial aid to all European nations who were damaged in the war, including the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and its satellite states, which is basically Eastern Europe at this point, declined the money. In America, there was actually resistance to this plan. It was very controversial. But in February of 1948, when a communist coup saw Czechoslovakia fall under Soviet control, American support solidified behind this Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan established an economic cooperation administration, and it pumped $3 billion over 3 years into Europe. And it worked. It worked spectacularly. Europe production is up 64% over these 3 years. And none of the countries who received financial aid turned to communism and became satellite states of the Soviet Union. The Marshall Plan, I think, even though you might be troubled a bit by the Cold War motive, is one of the most important, and in my personal opinion, one of the greatest things America has ever done. If we look at America kind of from 10,000 feet and we look down, the Marshall Plan is, I think, one of those things that really stands out as a great thing we did in world history. And we benefited from it dramatically. There were stipulations in the Marshall Plan that countries had to use some of this money to buy American-produced goods. And so it was a tremendous economic boost to America as well. Part of the prosperity we're going to look at in the 1950s is directly related to the Marshall Plan. Here are some cartoons we'll look over in class, but if you're looking at home, you can pause and check these out. Some criticisms of the Marshall Plan, or at least one is. In 1948, Harry Truman asked for and gets a peacetime draft. The idea is that we could go to war at any minute with the Soviets. The United States and Soviets began to negotiate on nuclear weapons. Of course, America has an atomic bomb, and the Soviets, as of yet, do not. And they're trying to negotiate some deal to prevent this turning into an atomic situation here. And American research begins to escalate into greater, more powerful bombs. In 1946, the Atomic Energy Commission is established, and by 1950, Harry Truman is approving research into a new bomb, the H-bomb, or the hydrogen bomb, many times more powerful than the atom bomb. In 1947, I want to talk about the National Security Act. This is a bill passed in the wake of World War II that merges all armed forces under the newly created Department of Defense. Before we had the Department of War, Department of Defense sounds better, although there's a great irony that we were much more defensive when we had a Department of War, and we've been much more offensive or warlike since we've had a Department of Defense, but oh well. The National Security Act creates a National Security Council to oversee foreign and military policy. It also transforms the OSS, which has been the intelligence gathering organization during World War II, which was formed specifically for World War II, into a permanent agency called the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. This group is in charge of intelligence and spying outside of American borders. It's not supposed to operate inside the United States, although we know that it has. This is also a massive expansion of presidential power. By taking this newly created enormous intelligence agency and unifying the military command structure of the Department of Defense, the power of the President of the United States is far greater than it had been before. And this kind of is the major creation of this idea that the President of the United States is the most powerful man in the world. In 1948, America, Britain, and France create West Germany as a buffer state to the Soviet Union. The Soviets have made it clear they have no intention of giving up East Germany. It becomes a Soviet client state. But we also end up dividing up Berlin. Three of the four zones in Berlin had been controlled by America, Britain, and France, while the fourth zone had been controlled by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union refuses to allow Berlin to reunify into one city with a free, democratically elected government, and so the Allies refuse to abandon their part of Berlin, and it becomes West Berlin, this island of the West, stuck there in the middle of Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe. Stalin's unhappy about this arrangement, and in June 24th of 1948, he blockades Berlin. He doesn't allow anything in or out. He cuts off the water, the electricity, everything. Truman does not want a war with the Soviet Union, but he's also unwilling to abandon Berlin. And so America embarks on an enormous project, an airlift. We fly everything Berlin needs in for 10 months. We deliver 2.5 million tons of goods, and we keep 2 million people going during this embargo. We spend $224 million in 1948 dollars, or $2.3 billion in 2012 dollars, doing this. Stalin eventually gives up in the spring of 1949, and this is considered a great victory for Truman. Without having to go to war, he managed to back Stalin down from one of his these kind of bold moves he takes against the West, and the Berlin airlift ends in the spring of 49. By October of 49, Germany is formally and officially divided, and there you see the map, how Germany gets split into the West Germany and East Germany, and Berlin itself split. This leads the Western forces to form an alliance. This is created on April 4th of 1949. 12 nations come together originally, and they create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a mutual defense league. If any one of these countries goes to war, the other countries will defend them. And it is specifically targeted, obviously, at the Soviets. And now the Soviets know that if they mess with any country you see in green on this map, that they will answer to all of the countries. It also establishes a standing NATO army, which is primarily made up of American forces, in Europe to hopefully stop any sort of Soviet incursions into Europe. The Soviets respond, although it takes them 6 years, in 1955 with their own treaty organization, the Warsaw Pact, which is a mutual defense organization of the Soviet-controlled states. And there you see how they're kind of clustered there around Russia, Eastern Europe, and southern Central Asia.